Well, folks, pull up a chair, because what I want to talk about today isn't stocks, or bonds, or interest rates, or the price of Coca-Cola. Though those are all mighty fine topics, I'm usually happy to ramble about. No, today's conversation is a little heavier, a little stranger, and a whole lot more important. It's about American democracy and a former president who is now facing more legal exposure than a Nebraska farmer in January without his coat on. I've been around a long time, long enough to remember the radio crackling with news about Pearl Harbor, long enough to watch McCarthy wave sheets of paper that never seemed to contain actual names, long enough to see presidents rise, fall, resign, deny, and sometimes do all of that before lunch. I've seen scandals come and go like thunderstorms rolling across the plains. And if there's one thing I've learned in 90-plus years, it's that our institutions get shaken, bent, stretched, rattled, sometimes nearly toppled, but so far they have never quite broken. But I'll tell you something honestly. Boy, are they being tested right now. What we're witnessing today is one of the most serious stress tests the American system has ever faced. I don't say that to be dramatic. Believe me, at my age, I don't need drama. The facts speak loudly enough on their own. Now imagine for a moment that I'm not Warren Buffett the investor, but Warren Buffett the American citizen. Just one man in a country of 330 million reading the same documents everyone else can read. Because that's how I approach this special counsel report. And let me tell you, this is not something you curl up with next to a fireplace and a cherry coke. This thing reads like a cross between a legal brief, a crime novel, and a civics lesson written by someone who has never cracked a joke in their life. Hundreds of witnesses, thousands of documents, text messages, emails, recorded calls, digital trails longer than the Missouri River, and all of it pointing toward one conclusion so clear even a distracted accountant couldn't miss it. The special counsel believes the evidence is strong enough to obtain and sustain a conviction against Donald Trump. Let me pause on that. Prosecutors do not use phrasing like that casually. If one of our Berkshire subsidiaries submitted a memo saying an accountant had evidence sufficient for conviction, I'd assume that man was about to swap his necktie for an orange jumpsuit. And what the special counsel is saying here, plainly, directly, unmistakably, is that if presidential immunity weren't a legal question right now, the former president would already be facing charges that have nothing to do with rallies, slogans, or fundraising emails. That is not political spin. That is legal assessment. Before we get carried away, let me make something very clear. This isn't about politics. This is about the rule of law. I don't care if you're a Democrat, Republican, Whig, Bull Moose, or you still think Teddy Roosevelt is hiding somewhere ready to jump back in. A country cannot function if laws apply to some people and not to others. Running a nation that way is like running a business where half the employees follow GAAP standards and the other half scribble numbers on napkins. You won't be operating long. Now, the special counsel's report lays out a sequence of events that isn't vague or debatable. It is specific, it is documented, and it is stunning. Trump was told he lost the 2020 election repeatedly by his attorney general, his campaign staff, his state allies, his national security officials, his cybersecurity experts, and his own data analysts. These weren't political opponents. They weren't activists. They weren't cable news personalities. They were his people. They were paid to give accurate information, not comforting fiction. And yet, despite all of that, he moved forward with several plans to overturn the election anyway. Here's where intent becomes crucial. Intent is the dividing line between a mistake and misconduct. If one of our companies misplaces a decimal point once, that's a mistake. If they misplace the decimal after the auditors say 3 times, fix that, then we're looking at intent. What the report shows is exactly that. And Trump was warned again and again and again. There is no fraud. The courts have rejected every claim. The proposed schemes are illegal. He heard all of it. He processed it. And then he proceeded anyway. That's intent. Let's walk through a core example. The fake elector scheme. This wasn't some group of caffeinated volunteers in a basement. It was an organized, multi-state effort designed to produce fraudulent documents claiming to represent the legitimate electors of states that Biden had won. These documents weren't jokes or protests. They were formatted to look official. They were signed by individuals claiming authority they did not possess. Submitting false federal documents is a crime so basic, even a first-year law student could explain it. Imagine me printing a certificate declaring myself the governor of Nebraska. That doesn't make it true, and it doesn't make it legal. Then we add the pressure campaign. Georgia, Arizona, Michigan, Pennsylvania. Same approach, different zip codes. Find the votes. Decertify the results. Replace the slate. Just say the election was corrupt and leave the rest to me and the Republican congressman. Folks, if someone in one of our companies said, just change the numbers and leave the rest to me, we'd call that cooking the books. And regulators do not smile kindly on cookbook chefs. Now we arrive at January 6th. I am not an expert in mob psychology, but I do know basic human behavior. If you spend weeks telling millions of people that their democracy has been stolen, if you gather them in one place, tell them to fight. Tell them their country is at stake. Tell them to march to the Capitol. Well, you don't need a PhD to predict something dangerous will follow. The special counsel describes a president who knew the crowd was armed, knew the certification was underway, and knew his own vice president could not legally do what he demanded, and still encouraged the pressure. Witnesses described him as pleased that the certification was being delayed. That is not confusion. That is not innocent. That is participation. And here's what people forget. The markets don't care about politics, but they care deeply about stability. Undermining the peaceful transfer of power isn't just morally wrong, it's economically dangerous. Confidence is the foundation of democracy and the economy. Lose that, and the whole structure shakes, and that is why this moment matters. Because the special counsel's evidence isn't vague. It isn't theoretical. It is overwhelming, and it points toward the most unprecedented moment in American history. A former president potentially facing federal indictment for attempting to overturn an election. Step 3. He ignored everyone telling him it was illegal. And this part right here is one of the most important pieces of the entire puzzle because prosecutors don't have to guess what was in someone's mind. They look at what they were told and what they did afterward. It's the oldest method in law. If you tell a man this is unlawful, this violates the Constitution. Courts have ruled against this. Multiple states have certified this. There is no evidence of fraud. And that man continues acting as if none of those warnings exist. You are not dealing with confusion. You are dealing with deliberate action, taken in the full light of contrary information. And the report is overflowing with examples of that exact behavior. One White House lawyer told investigators that Trump was informed countless times that the proposals being pushed by outside advisors were illegal. His own data team told him the numbers didn't support his claims. Senior DOJ officials told him repeatedly that they found no evidence of meaningful fraud. Even advisors who were personally loyal to him admitted under oath that they told him the legal theories were nonsense. Yet he kept going. That is what prosecutors call knowledge of falsity. And when you knowingly push a false scheme for personal gain, that crosses into the territory of criminal intent. Step 4, he took actions that matched the intent. Words matter, but actions matter more. And the actions taken after being warned were not the actions of a man who simply disagreed with advisors. They were the actions of a man pursuing a plan despite knowing it was unlawful. The report shows meetings scheduled specifically to push state legislators to overturn results. Calls arranged to lean on election officials. Draft memos circulated, laying out pathways to invalidate electors. Pressure directed at the Department of Justice to declare the election corrupt even when DOJ leadership said they had no evidence. And of course, the direct pressure on Mike Pence. Pressure applied even on the morning of January 6th, when Pence's own lawyers and the White House counsel's office had told Trump that the plan was illegal. If an investor had a CEO who ignored every compliance officer, every auditor, every legal advisor, and still signed off on a knowingly fraudulent plan, that CEO would be escorted out in handcuffs before the next board meeting. Step 5. He responded to obstacles not with reassessment, but with escalation. This is one of the clearest signs of intent in any complex case. When people make mistakes, they usually slow down once confronted with contradictory information. They step back. They reconsider. But when someone is pursuing a goal they know is improper, obstacles tend to make them push harder, faster, and in more dangerous ways. And that's exactly what happened. When courts rejected lawsuits, new lawsuits were filed. When state officials refused to manipulate results, pressure intensified. Trump didn't drift into wrongdoing, he accelerated toward it. When DOJ leaders refused to sign false claims, he tried to replace them. When Pence refused to break the law, Trump attacked him even as the certification was underway. This wasn't confusion. It was intent. The special counsel makes clear that belief is irrelevant when you've been told the truth repeatedly by experts. Ignoring verified facts doesn't create an opinion. It creates a knowingly false statement. Trump rejected evidence, pushed unlawful strategies, pressured officials, and used presidential power to pursue a plan he was warned was illegal. This crisis is bigger than one man. It's about public trust, the rule of law, and whether a president is accountable. The only thing delaying charges now is the debate over immunity. If that shield falls, indictments will move fast. What happened wasn't a mistake. It was a deliberate attempt to overturn a lawful election. When a lawyer tells a client, "Don't do this, it's illegal," and the client does it anyway, that's intent, pure and simple. The special counsel lays out multiple moments where Trump's own attorneys warned him directly. This violates the Constitution. This violates federal law. This won't survive any court review. And instead of stopping, he advanced harder. A president isn't required to be a legal scholar, but he is required to understand the difference between advice and red flag warnings. When every expert is shouting stop and you accelerate anyway, that's not confusion. That's willfulness. January 6th wasn't an accident. I'm no sociologist, but I've lived through enough turmoil to know cause and effect. If you tell millions they've been betrayed, give them a date, give them a place. Urge them to fight like hell, and then publicly target your own vice president for refusing to violate the law. The outcome is not unpredictable. It is the logical result of the message. The special counsel documents something even more disturbing. Trump was told the crowd was armed, new certification was underway, new Pence refused to alter the results, and new violence had erupted. Witnesses say he was pleased certification was being disrupted. In business, benefiting from the harm is a sign of responsibility. In law, it's evidence of guilty mind. Then there's the deleted messages problem. One of the strongest indicators of wrongdoing in any investigation is the disappearance of records. People confident in their actions preserve documentation. People who aren't eliminate it. The special counsel notes messages were deleted, drafts vanished, electronic conversations wiped, and witnesses pressured. In every company I've owned, when records vanish after investigators request them, it doesn't end with apologies. It ends with indictments. And Trump's legal team isn't even arguing innocence. They're not challenging the facts. They've adopted a single strategy: delay. Delay rulings, delay hearings, delay immunity decisions, delay discovery, delay trial dates. Delay until clocks run out. Innocent people want speed. People who fear convictions want time. Time isn't a defense. It's a tactic, and the clock is narrowing, which brings us to where this leaves the country. We're living through a defining moment for American democracy. Not because of one man, but because of what the system chooses to do about that man. If the rule of law holds, the foundation grows stronger. If it bends, the foundation weakens. If it breaks, the consequences echo for generations. And this isn't only political, it's economic. Markets don't care about slogans or rallies. Markets care about stability. Confidence is the invisible engine of the American economy. When that confidence cracks, money flows quietly away. On January 6th, while chaos unfolded, markets around the world reacted instantly, hedging, tightening, reassessing. Global investors drafted American Democratic Instability memos before the tear gas even cleared. If elections in the United States can be overturned by pressure or mobs, the stability of the dollar, bonds, contracts, and long-term investments becomes uncertain. Shake the political foundation and the economic structure wobbles. That's why the question isn't whether an indictment will harm the economy. The real danger comes if the system fails to enforce the law. Accountability signals strength. Impunity signals weakness. Investors don't run from fair justice. They run from unpredictability. Nations lose stability not when they punish wrongdoing, but when they refuse to. If Trump is indicted, markets interpret it as proof the system still works. If he isn't, they begin quietly recalibrating their assumptions about American stability. Capital doesn't flee instantly, it drifts. A slow seepage of trust, investment, and long-term confidence. Because when rules become optional for the powerful, the guardrails become decoration. And decorative guardrails don't protect wealth. In the end, markets don't fear accountability. They fear a future where accountability disappears. Public trust is the invisible oxygen of the system. It is the unspoken contract that holds democracy together. That votes count, officials follow the Constitution, and leaders concede when they lose. Once that trust erodes, it doesn't repair itself. You have to fight for it, actively and deliberately. That is what this moment tests. If millions believe the system is rigged unless their side wins, or that laws apply only when convenient, you don't just get polarization, you get the slow corrosion of democracy. When the foundation corrodes, everything built on top, the economy, markets, stability, public confidence, begins to hollow out. Nations lose trust gradually. One exception here, one broken rule there, one unpunished leader after another, until people stop believing in the system altogether. The damage is structural and long-lasting. The Special Counsel's report is not just about one man. It is a test of the law, the presidency, the courts, the public, and the idea of America as a country governed by rules, not rulers. History will judge whether the system held under unprecedented stress. If it holds, the American system will be stronger for a century. If it fails, cracks will silently spread through the republic, and markets, the economy, and even the dollar will not protect us. Only the rule of law can. The report shows a clear pattern. This is not random noise. It is deliberate and coordinated. Attempts to overturn the election results, pressure on state officials, coercion of the vice president, mobilization of supporters, and obstruction of certification, all despite every advisor, legal expert, court, and state official repeatedly telling the former president he had lost. This is unprecedented. The peaceful transfer of power itself was attacked from inside the Oval Office. Markets react not to noise, but to patterns, and this pattern threatens the stability that underpins the entire economy. The U.S. economy rests on three pillars: the rule of law, peaceful transfer of power, and public confidence in both. If one weakens, the others wobble. If two are weakened, the structure shakes. If all three are undermined, GDP, institutions, and global influence cannot maintain stability. Investors measure trust, predictability, and certainty. When confidence falters, capital quietly drifts away. Foreign investors reassess risk. Interest rates rise, currencies soften, contracts are renegotiated, and political risk premiums increase. Instability builds slowly and then suddenly, like January 6th, when the world watched Americans storm the Capitol. The precedent is critical. If the former president is not held accountable, future leaders will see they can bend the rules with impunity. Once that door opens, it rarely closes. Democracy becomes governed by personalities, not laws. Markets do not panic immediately, but they lose confidence quietly. Companies pause expansion, investors hedge, foreign governments reassess risk, and political uncertainty grows. That is the cost of undermining trust. This moment transcends politics. It is bigger than one election or one individual. It is about whether the Constitution and rule of law matter more than personal power. Whether the presidency is powerful but not absolute. Whether elections are real, even when a side loses. Whether accountability remains a cornerstone of governance. The Special Counsel's report forces America to confront a fundamental question. Are we a country of laws or a country of unchecked power? One answer stabilizes markets, strengthens democracy, and reinforces confidence. The other undermines trust, destabilizes institutions, and threatens economic and political stability. This is the long-term American game. A country where laws are respected, leaders are accountable, and democracy remains strong for future generations is worth betting on.